The last carrier's cart set Elo and Reed down at the Raycote crossroads, 2 miles short of the gates, the driver swearing he'd not take his old mare another furlong with weather coming off the fen. So she walked, as she had come to most things in her 24 years, on foot, unannounced, and later than anyone had troubled to hope. She smelled Fenwold before she saw it, wet hawthorn, coal smoke, the green breath of standing water. Then the drive bent, the hedges fell away, and there was the house, long and low and gold-gray in the failing light, folded into its own green valley like something asleep. She had one moment to think it beautiful. Then she heard the men, not the ordinary noise of a working yard. This was the other kind, the ragged climbing shout of men who have stopped knowing what to do. Ahead, where the drive widened before the gatehouse, a timber wain had gone over. One great wheel still turned slowly at the sky. A load of felled oak had slid, and under the last log, half in the ditch water, lay a boy. He was perhaps 11. His leg was wrong, and the ditch around it was going red. 6 men crowded him, and not one dared touch the leg. A groom stood gray-faced, his hands held out as though to catch a thing already fallen. "Fetch Mr. Dam." "All of it," someone was shouting. "Fetch the surgeon," and a flatter voice answered, "Hopeless. All of it's at Raycote. That's an hour. He'll not have an hour." A horseman came through them at speed, and was down before his beast had stopped. A tall man, bareheaded in a dark coat, his face forgetful of surprise. He looked once at the boy, and below and still 20 feet off, saw something cross that hard face that was not command. It was the look of a man staring at a thing he cannot survive seeing twice. For one whole second, the Duke of Halveston did nothing. So Lowen set down her bag and walked into the middle of it. She did not run. She had learned long ago that running frightens the frightened. She went down on her knees in the red water, put both hands flat and hard high on the inside of the boy's torn thigh, and pressed until she felt the terrible pulse of it slow under her palms. "A belt," she said. "To no one, to all of them. A belt, a rein, a strap. Now, and a stick the length of my hand. Nobody moved." She lifted her chin and found the nearest man's eyes. Your belt. I will not ask twice." Something in the plainness of it did what her small size could not. The belt came, then a driving rein, then a carter's short whipstock. She worked without looking up, a loop high on the leg, the whipstock through it, a half-turn, another, until the leather bit and the flood beneath her hands became a weeping. From her pocket she drew a small thing that caught the last light, a lancet in a worn silver case, older than she was, its initials rubbed nearly to nothing. She cut the breeches clear, packed the wound with the linen fichu from her own throat, and bound it with a strip torn from her petticoat, all of it quick and unhurried at once, the way a woman does a thing she has done 100 times in her sleep. The boy's eyes rolled white. She laid her red hand against his cold cheek. "No, stay. Look at me. What is your name?" "Jory," he managed. "Jory, you are not going to die in a ditch today. It would be a great waste of a good pair of lungs, and I will not have it." The men around her had gone silent. "Lift the log. 3 of you on my word and no sooner. Gently. He is held. He will keep, if you are gentle." They lifted. She drew the boy free with her own arms beneath him, and she did not once let go of the twisted strap at his thigh, and only then did she look up and find the whole yard looking back, the grooms, the gatekeeper's wife, 2 ladies who had ridden up behind the Duke and sat their horses, now in silk the color of pond ice, and the Duke himself, a foot among them, watching her with a look she could not read. "Take him to the kitchen fire, not a cold room," she said, rising, soaked to the elbow in another man's blood. "Keep the leg high, ease the strap a quarter turn every half hour, or he'll lose the foot to save the life, and we'll have both." She was giving orders in a Duke's own gateway, an unknown stranger nobody had ever seen, and for a moment the whole machinery of Fenwold did as she said. The Duke did not thank her. The boy was carried off, and the thing passed out of the terrible into the merely grave, and the Duke turned to the elder of the two silk ladies. Eloan, gathering her ruined bag, was near enough to hear that lady laugh, low and bright. "Good heavens, Helveston! Who is she? A creature with nerve like that. One could almost forget she has neither face nor name. You ought to keep her." It was said half in jest, the way such women make sport of a duke. They mean their daughters to marry. The Duke of Halveston looked back once at the small figure wiping a dead man's lancet clean on her sodden skirt. No duke would ever choose her, he said, not cruelly, only with certainty, the way a man names the price of a thing he does not want, and he went up the steps into his house. Eloan heard it. She had been meant to, perhaps. Men certain of a thing rarely lower their voices for the one it concerns. She returned the blade to its case, and the case to her pocket, and thought only that her hands wanted washing, and that she had come a very long way to be nobody again. She did not see the old man in black who had watched from the top of the steps. Pell had been butler at Fenwold 31 years, and never in that time had he seen a living soul stop a great vein bleeding with a whipstock, a throat cloth, and a voice like still water. He said nothing. He was not a man who said things, but he set the thought away where he kept the few that mattered, and went down the steps himself into the first cold spits of rain to carry the strange young woman's bag. Eloan Reed had come to Fenwold to disappear, and she had chosen it precisely because no one there could ever learn that Eloan Reed did not exist. Her name was Vaughan, Eloan Vaughan. Her father had been Gareth Vaughan, surgeon and apothecary of the town of Halbrook, 60 miles south and a world away. A big, gentle, clumsy-seeming man who was never once clumsy with a blade or a bone. He had set her on a stool beside his table when she was 7, and taught her to read a body the way other fathers taught daughters to read music. The body does not lie, he used to say. It only waits to be read by someone willing to look. She had been willing. She had been, God help her, good at it. That was the whole of the trouble. 2 winters passed. A young gentleman had died under her father's care, Mr. Bodding, Hessel Ashe, only son of Sir Rowland Ashe, magistrate and the largest man in that county. The boy, a dissipated youth, had swallowed far more laudanum than any physician had written, atop a night's hard drinking, and died of it in the small hours. And his father, who could not bear a son dead of his own excess, needed another man's name to hang the death on. Gareth Vaughan had signed the last prescription. It was enough. There was an inquest, and behind the inquest, the whisper of a graver charge, and by spring, the surgery was shut, the patients scattered, and a good name 40 years in the building was undone in 6 weeks. Her father never went to prison. He did something quieter and worse. He sat down by his cold surgery fire and simply stopped, the way a clock stops. And inside the year, he lay in the churchyard beside her mother. She had kept 2 things from the wreck. One was his lancet, the silver case worn smooth by his hand, worth almost nothing, and beyond any price she would name. The other she kept sewn into the false lining of her workbag, and it was worth a man's life, or her own, her father's casebook, in his round, clear hand. The doses to the grain, the hours, the truth. Proof, to any honest soul who would read it, that Gareth Vaughan had killed no one, and that a frightened, powerful man had buried his own son's shame in another man's grave. She had never used it. For who would believe a ruined reputation's daughter over a magistrate? And Sir Rowland Ashe, she had reason to know, had not stopped wanting to be sure the book was gone, and the girl who carried it gone with it. So Eloan Vaughan became Eloan Reed, a plain surgeon's orphan of nowhere in particular, who answered an advertisement 3 counties north for a companion to a titled lady losing her sight. She asked little. She meant to give a great deal, be thanked for none of it, and be above all unremarkable, a woman no one wrote a letter about, inquired after, or chose. She had learned young that to be wanted was to be found, and to be found was the one thing she could not afford. A duke had looked at her across a bloody gateway and said aloud the truest, safest thing anyone had said of her in 2 years. No one would ever choose her. She told herself it was a relief. She very nearly felt it. Fenwald was dying, and it took Elowen less than a week to see of what. It was not for want of money. The estate was among the richest in 3 counties. It was the harder thing to name, the particular rot that takes a house when the person at its heart has stopped looking at it. She had lived in such a house herself after her mother died, and she knew the signs the way you know a smell out of childhood. The first thing she noticed was the clock. In the great stone hall stood a long case clock older than the family, its brass face gone soft gold with the years, and it was stopped. Both hands rested at 17 minutes past 4, and the dust on the glass said they had rested there a long while. When she asked, the housemaid went quiet and said only that it had stopped the morning Master Perrin died, and that his grace had given orders it was never to be wound again. Master Perrin had been the Duke's son, 7 years old. 2 springs passed. He had taken the fen fever that rose each year out of the low cottages, and in 9 days he was in the ground at Fenwald Church, and the clock had not moved since, and the Duke, by every account, was not the man who had woken that morning. He would not enter the nursery tower. He would not speak the boy's name. The whole house kept its hours by a clock that had stopped, and no one thought it strange any longer. The second thing she noticed was Mr. Kroll. Ambrose Kroll was the land agent, and he was, everyone agreed, a treasure, a neat, brisk, obliging man of 40-odd, who seemed never to sleep and never to be at a loss. He paid the tradesmen, set the rents, hired and turned off, and carried the whole grinding business of the estate so that his grace need never be troubled by a figure or a name. He had come the year the boy died, into a house too deep in grief to watch him, and made himself quietly and entirely the one man who knew where anything was or what it cost. No steward's book had been laid before the Duke in 2 years. Kroll kept the office keys upon his own person, and smiled and was thanked for it. A house where one man holds all the reckoning and answers to no one, Elowen thought, is not a house being managed. It is a house being eaten. But she said nothing. She had not come to Fenwald to notice things, and the third thing, the thing she tried hardest not to notice, was the fever. They spoke of it the way people speak of weather, the fen fever, the summer sickness that came to Lower Fen most years and took a child or 2 and an old body or 3, and was nobody's fault, being the fault of the marsh. On her 4th day, she carried a basket to a cottage where a woman had lost a second child in as many years, and stood in the doorway with the broth cooling in her hands, looking at the family's water butt, the green ditch behind it, the fine new drain the estate had lately laid just above the well, and something in her that had been quiet 2 years sat up and began, against her will to count. She looked away from it. She had a lady to read to, and a false name to keep, and a book sewn into her bag that could hang her, and none of it, not the stopped clock, nor the smiling agent, nor the small graves at Fenwald Church was any affair of hers. She folded her hands and learned the servants' names and held her tongue. It lasted a fortnight. On the 14th day, the Dowager Duchess sent for her out of hours, and Elowen went up to the south sitting-room knowing, in the way she always knew such things, that she had been found out. Adeline, Dowager Duchess of Halveston, was 78 and losing her sight, and she was resigned to neither fact. She sat very upright by the window, in the one warm room the house troubled to keep, a woman gone, spare and silver, with a face like a fine old knife, and eyes that had begun to cloud at their rims like ice creeping in at the edge of a pond. She could no longer read. She had discovered, she said, that this improved her hearing to a most inconvenient degree. "Sit," she said, "there where the light falls on you. I cannot make out your face anymore, girl, but I can still read the shape of a person against a window, and I have learned more from shapes in 1 year than from faces in 80. You hold yourself like someone waiting to be sent away. A fortnight you have read to me in that careful voice that gives nothing, and mended my fire and dropped eyebright water in my eyes. Do not imagine I failed to notice the eyebright, and in all that time you have not told me one true thing. I am too old to be lied to in comfort. Tell me what you have seen in my son's house, and do not be kind about it. I have no time left for kindness." And because there is a particular relief in being asked a true question by someone who wants the true answer, and because she had been swallowing it so long, Elowen told her she had not meant to. She told her of the flues and the fever and the fine new drain above the old well, and the cottages that buried children and the cottages that did not, and the neat obliging man who held every key and every figure and answered to no one. The old woman listened without moving. When Elowen had done, she was quiet a long while. "My son," she said at last, "is not a fool. He is a man who buried a wife and then buried a child, and that is a different creature altogether, though the two can look alike from across a room. When Perrin died, he could not bear to look at any part of the world that had been the boy's. This house, these lands, every account and roof and debt the child would one day have carried. So he found a man who would look at it for him, and he has thanked God for that man every day, since she turned her clouded eyes to the window. That is his weakness. It has cost him more than he yet knows." She reached out one knotted hand, and with the certainty of the newly blind, found Elowen's wrist and closed on it. "You know something of physic. Do not be modest. Modesty is a servant's coat, and you may take it off in this room. You bound the Ludd boy's leg in a ditch, and he has kept it, which Ovid tells me he never looked for. You have quieted the fever in 3 cottages that were past quieting. I am going to make you useful, not as a companion. A companion is only furniture that reads aloud, and I have worn out 4 of them. I am giving you the still room and the household stores, and the care of every sick soul on this estate, on my own authority, which in this house is older than Mr. Kroll's, and a good deal harder to turn off." Her grip tightened. "The fever comes with the warm weather. It comes every summer, and every summer we bury a child or 2 and blame the marsh, and my son will not look, and Mr. Kroll will not be troubled, and I am too blind and too old to walk down to Lower Fen and see for myself. You are neither. You have until the weather turns. Find me what is killing my tenant's children before it comes up the hill again, for it came up the hill once, and it took mine." Elowen sat very still. She had come to Fenwald to carry no trouble but her own. She looked at the blind, upright, unanswerable old woman, and she heard the Duke's voice again across the bloody gate. No Duke would ever choose her, and understood that she was being chosen after all, for the one kind of work no one ever thanks you for. "I will look, your grace," she said. It was the first promise she had made to a living soul in 2 years, and it frightened her more than the gate had. So Elowen looked, and because looking to her was never an idle thing, because her father had taught her that to see a thing truly is already to have begun the mending of it, she did not only look, she took hold. She began with the still room, because a still room is a house's health kept in a cupboard, and the state of Fenwald's told her the rest. It had not been properly kept since the late Duchess died. The shelves were a graveyard, cordials gone to vinegar, syrups crusted black, a jar of leeches long dead in their green water. But at the very back, in a rounder, smaller hand than the dust, she found a receipt book, the late Duchess's own, Lady Marrow's, 9 years gone, of the childbed that had given the Duke his son. Her remedies were set down fair, a young wife learning her house, a syrup for a child's cough, a salve for chilblains, a water for tired eyes. Eloan read it by candle like a letter from a woman she might have liked, and then did the only sensible thing with the knowledge of the dead. She used it. Within the week, the still room smelled of beeswax and angelica again, and the cough syrup that went down to Lower Fen was Lady Marrow's own, made up by a stranger's hands. Then she went to the sick. This was the work the house had given over to the marsh, and she took it up as though it were arithmetic, which, in its way, it was. She sat with the fevered. She learned which cottages they came from, and, being her father's daughter, she learned where each cottage drew its water. It did not take her long to see that the dying kept to a map. The cottages along the Lower Fen Lane that filled their butts at the old well by the lane end buried their children. The cottages up the rise that had their own spring did not. It was not the marsh. The marsh lay over all of it. The dying did not. She said nothing of this to anyone. She only began, on no authority but a kind word at a doorway, to tell the Lower Fen women to carry their water from the upper spring and to boil what they drank, as her father had made the poor of Hallbrook do in a bad year. Some of them humored the odd little companion. Those that did stopped burying children. That was the beginning of her being believed. There was one door she never afterward forgot. Mercy Kitto of Lower Fen had laid one child in the ground the summer before, and had a second down with the fever the week Eowyn first came to her, a girl of 5, grey-lipped and burning, past what the neighbors thought saving. Lowen did not dose her with the marsh doctor's cordials that were half brandy and half surrender. She had the child carried up to the airy loft, had them boil every drop that passed her lips, brought Lady Marrow's cooling water, and sat the whole night through with her own hand about the small, hot wrist, counting the pulse down. By the third dawn the fever broke. Mercy Kitto, who had no words for such a thing, walked 4 miles to the great house with a dozen eggs in her apron, and would not leave until Miss Reed had taken them. It was not much, but a shilling of trust, Lowen had long since learned, is like a shilling of proof, worth almost nothing on its own, and worth the world once you have gathered enough of them into one place. The house came round to her, the way a wary dog comes round sidelong, and then all at once Jory Ludd kept his leg and his foot both, and walked on it by Whitsun with a limp he was proud of, and after that the stable would have lain down in the road for her. Mrs. Pardew, the cook who had wept 2 years over a kitchen no one would mend, found her flue swept and her copper mended, and a woman who could be told the trouble and would answer it, and she cooked like a soul let out of jail. The maids brought Eowyn their chilblains and their heartaches, and Pell, old Pell, who had served 3 dukes and held on principle that nothing new was ever an improvement, took to bringing her, without quite admitting that he did it, the small questions of the house he had carried uselessly for 2 years to his master's shut door. There was a wager below stairs, as there is in every great house, and Eowyn knew of it within days, for a woman who has spent her whole life overlooked hears everything the loud people miss. The bet was not whether she would stay. It was on the Duke's own word. His Grace had said at the gate, before the Faulkner ladies and half the yard, that no Duke would ever choose her, and the footmen, who found the notion of their grim master choosing anyone the best sport in years, had made a book on how soon the little companion would be packed off to prove him right. Even Suki, who liked her, had laid her honest sixpence on Michaelmas. Lowen did not mind. She thought it a fair bet. She had made a harder version of it herself, the day she signed a false name and came north with a dead man's lancet and 11 shillings. She did not mean to win it by argument. She had never in her life won anything by argument. She meant to win it the only way she trusted, by becoming, quietly and without fuss, the one thing the house could not do without. The Duke of Halliston noticed her the way a man notices a change in the weather, without wanting to, and all at once. For 2 years his coffee had come lukewarm and his fires been laid late. Now the fire was lit before he woke and the coffee was hot, and one grief-dulled morning he noticed it, and could not think whom to thank. His mother, whom he visited stiffly each evening, and who had been for 2 years a well of complaint, had begun instead to laugh. Actually, to laugh at something read to her in a careful voice down the hall. Who was responsible, he asked Pell, for the house? And Pell, not a man given to speeches, permitted himself 4 words. Miss Reed, Your Grace. He met her 3 days later on the north stair, by no design, which was the only way he met anyone that year. She had a covered basket on her arm and a smudge of green salve at one knuckle, and she stood aside for him against the cold wall, with her eyes down as a servant should. He went past her. Then he stopped. You are the woman from the gate? Yes, Your Grace. My mother has given you the still room. It was not quite a question. Among other things, sir, he looked at her then. Properly, for the first time since the blood and the rain, now that she was dry and it was daylight. She was small and plain and brown, the sort of woman a ballroom's eye slides across without catching. Except that when she lifted her face to answer him, her look was level and gray and wholly without fear, and he had not been looked at so by a living soul in 2 years. His servants looked at the floor. His mother these days looked at nothing. This woman looked at him as though he were simply a man who had asked a question and might be told the truth, if he could bear the hearing of it. The Ludd boy, he said, for something to say. He kept the leg. He kept the foot as well, sir. He will dance at his wedding badly. Something that was almost, and not quite, the shadow of a smile moved at the corner of the Duke's mouth and was gone before it could be given a name. That is all, he said, and went on up the stair, and did not know why the house felt, for the space of one breath, a shade less like a place where something had died. We'll pause here, just a moment. If you'd like to see how a plain little companion answers a duke who has already made up his mind against her, subscribe and stay with us. It is only beginning. The weeks went by, and Eloan did not go. No one said so aloud, but the house said it in 100 small ways, in the wager quietly forgotten, in the tradesman who now asked at the door for Miss Reed, in the plain fact that the whole great machinery of Fenwold had begun, without anyone deciding it should, to turn upon a small woman with a still-room key and a level eye. She had, without a title and without wishing one, begun to run the house. And the deeper into the house she could see, the worse it looked. For it was not only the well and the fever. Wherever her work carried her, the stores, the kitchen accounts the dowager let her keep, a word with a carter, a bill settled at the door, she kept meeting the same thing. Figures that would not add, work paid for that no one had done, a quiet river of money running out of a rich house toward a place she could not yet see. And it all ran back, every trickle of it, to one neat, obliging, indispensable man. One gray afternoon in the last week of April, counting linen in the north passage, she found the door to that man's kingdom standing open. Mr. Muet. Kroll had gone that day to the Raycote sessions where he sat as the Duke's man on the small business of the county, and was not looked for before dark. The estate office lay at the end of the north passage, sharing a wall and a door with the great store press where the household linen was kept. That door was always locked. It was not locked now. Eloan stood in the storeroom with her slate in her hand and counted sheets, and told herself that counting sheets was the whole of what she had come to do. She counted them twice. Then she set down the slate and crossed to the open door, and looked in. It was a neat room, as everything Kroll touched was neat. One ledger lay open on the desk, the estate book, fair and orderly, rents in and expenses out, a great house living a little beyond itself. But honestly, or so the page swore, she did not touch it. She had not come for the book that was meant to be read. She had come, though she had not let herself know it until she was standing there, for the drain. On a shelf stood a row of bundled papers, each tied and labeled in Kroll's small, dry hand. She found the one she wanted by its date, the spring, 2 years gone. Works, Lower Fen. She untied it with fingers steadier than she felt. Here was the bill the estate had paid for a new stone culvert, to carry the sink and wash of the home farm clear of the lower fen spring, 62 pounds, a great sum, signed and settled. And here at the foot of it was the Duke's own hand, the loose, weary signature of a man who signed what was set before him because signing was easier than reading. And here, beneath, pinned where a careful man keeps the thing he means no one to find, was the pipelayer's own receipt from the yard at Raycote, for 11 pounds of common land drain and a day's labor, and no stone culvert at all. 62 pounds paid, 11 pounds spent, and no culvert, which was why the home farm sink still ran, as it had run for 2 years, straight down the rise and into the spring that fed the lower fen well. Eloan stood in the failing light and felt the whole shape of it settle together with a small, soft click, like a bone going home into its socket. The sink had fouled the water. The fouled water bred the fever. The fever came each summer now, worse than the old people could remember, and took the children of Lower Fen. And 2 springs ago, in the first and worst summer of the fouling, it had come up the rise, on a laundrymaid's hands, or a carried child's breath, up into the great house itself, and taken a 7-year-old boy in 9 days, and stopped a clock at 17 minutes past 4. Kroll had not only robbed a grieving man, he had, for the sake of 51 pounds, fouled the well that killed his master's son, and then stood at the graveside, no doubt, with his hat in his hands, and been thanked for his trouble. She did not weep. The knowledge sat in her instead, like a swallowed stone that would not be brought up again, however sensibly she told herself to forget it. She was still standing over the open bundle when from the passage beyond she heard a footstep, brisk, dry, unhurried, and unmistakable. Kroll, back before his time. She had no moment to think. She tied the bundle with hands that had dressed a torn artery without a tremor, and would not now quite obey her, and set it back on its shelf, date outward, exactly as it had lain. She stepped through into the storeroom and had the slate in her hand, and a number half spoken aloud, 24 pair of Holland sheets, and but 8 of them whole. When Ambrose Kroll came round the press with the raw spring cold still on his coat, his pleasant, sleepless eyes, going at once before ever they found her face, to the door between the rooms that should have been locked and was not. Well, Miss Reed, Kroll was smiling. He always smiled. It was as much a part of his office as his ring of keys. In my room, I think. In your storeroom, Mr. Kroll. She did not lift her eyes from the slate. Her Grace has asked me to take the linen, 24 pair of Holland sheets, and but 8 of them whole. It makes a poor account. You keep a great many accounts these days, for a lady's companion. Her Grace keeps me busy. He came a step into the storeroom, soft on his feet, for so trim a man, and set his shoulders to the office door, as though quietly to shut a subject. Her Grace, he said, ever pleasant, is 78, and going dark. She will not always be by to keep you busy, and when she is gone, this house will want managing by those who understand its ways. I should be sorry, Miss Reed, to think you had made yourself conspicuous before then. He let that settle, and then he did the thing that told her, more than any threat could, exactly how frightened he was. It is my business, you understand, to know the people who live beneath this roof, their people, their character, the name they were christened with. It steadies a house. His voice never lost its warmth. So I made a small inquiry or two, when you came, and I confess it puzzles me. There is remarkably little to be learned of Miss Eloan Ree. It is almost as though she stepped whole out of the air, at the Raycote crossroads, with a bag in her hand, and no yesterday at all the smile held. A young woman, alone in the world, no friends, no history, no soul to write a letter on her behalf, does well to keep small, to keep to her still room, to ask no questions whose answers can do her no good. Companions come and go at Fenwald, Miss Reed. It would grieve me to see you go before your time. Eloan set the slate down upon the linen shelf and looked at him, level and gray and without a tremor, and for the space of half a breath she saw it plainly, sitting there under the pleasantness like a stone under still water. He was afraid of her. That was the whole of it. He had come round the press, smiling on purpose to frighten her, and it was his own fear that had brought him, because a small woman with a good memory and a slate had been standing a little too near his open door. "I keep excellent accounts, Mr. Kroll," she said. "It is the one thing I do that no one has ever asked me to leave off." She took up her slate again. "Good evening to you." She walked out past him, and her hands did not begin to shake until she had turned the corner of the stair. She did not go to the Duke. For 3 nights, she lay awake and told herself every good reason not to. To go to the Duke was to be looked at, and to be looked at was to be asked her name and her people and where she had been, and behind all of that stood a market town called Halbrook, and a hanged reputation and a book sewn into her bag that could set her in a dock. A companion who crossed the agent would be turned off without a character. A woman turned off without a character gets herself talked of, and a woman talked of is a woman found, and once found. Once said aloud, she was a Lowen Vaughan again, the surgeon's disgraced girl, the one Sir Rowland Ashe had 2 years good reason to want silenced, and there would be a dark chaise on the northern road inside a fortnight. Better to keep her head low. Better to let a rich man's house go on quietly robbing itself. It was not her house. It was not her fight. She very nearly believed it. And then, on the 4th morning, the weather turned. It turned the way spring turns in the fen country, soft and warm and treacherous, a green heat lifting off the standing water, and with it, Eloa knew to the marrow of her the fever's own season. The dowager's clock had run out. She went down to Lower Fen with a basket, for that, at least, she was still allowed to do, and she found the sickness already sitting in 2 houses, and in the lane she met old Ammon Thuy. Ammon Thuy was 80 years old and bent nearly double, and he had buried a wife and a daughter and stood now at the foot of a bed where a granddaughter burned. His rent had been raised at Lady Day, though nothing under heaven had been done to earn the raising. "Mr. Shaw, Kroll says his grace has need of it," the old man said without the least complaint, folding his great cracked hands over the head of his stick. "And his grace is a good man that lost his boy, poor soul. I'll not grudge him. I do wonder, betimes, that the fine new drain they charged him for never carried the wet off, the way they promised it would. But I'd not trouble his grace with such a small thing, not with his grief." Through the low doorway behind him, Eloan could see the child, a girl of 6, her dark hair stuck with sweat to the bolster, her breath coming quick and shallow as a trapped bird's. She had seen that breathing before. She knew, to the grain and the hour, the plain, clean means that might yet turn it back, and she knew, too, that she had bound herself to silence while she went about the slow gathering of them. Eloan stood in the warm, treacherous morning with the basket cooling on her arm and looked at the old man troubling nobody. And she was ashamed, because there it was, the whole engine of it laid bare in a cottage doorway. Kroll had never needed to be clever. He had only needed everyone else to be good. He had built his theft upon a grieving man who would not look, and upon old people too loyal to complain, and upon a frightened companion who valued her own skin above a stranger's child. Every soul caught in it was being decent, and a house full of decent, frightened, grieving people can be bled white in perfect quiet, and will go on being bled until one of them is at last willing to be seen. She carried the empty basket home and washed it and made up her mind. She could not go to the Duke as a companion carrying a tale. He would not believe her, or Kroll would name her a hysteric and have her gone by week's end, and the fever would go on eating children while a clock stood stopped in the hall. She needed the thing itself. She needed the bill and the receipt, laid cheek by jowl. She needed the pipelayer's own word, and a tenant's honest mark, and the fouled ground itself to stand as witness. She needed to be, for once in her whole careful and invisible life, entirely and dangerously seen. She would build it the way her father had taught her to read a living body patiently, from every small sign at once, until the truth of it was past any man's denying. A shilling of proof at a time. So through that soft and dangerous spring, she built it, quietly, in her own neat hand, the way she had always kept her accounts. She could not get into the office again. Kroll kept it locked now, and kept upon her, besides a new watchfulness she felt, whenever she passed his door, like a draught. But she did not need the office. She built her case from the outside in, from doorways and tally sticks and the marks of honest people. She had the Raycote pipe layer's own reckoning, got on the pretext of pricing land drain for the still-room yard. £11, a day's labor, no culvert, and glad of the work. She had Thee and 2 other men set their marks to a plain statement of the rent they truly paid, against the rent the posted book allowed. She wrote down what the fever took and where, house by house, well by well, in a fair column no magistrate alive could wave away as a woman's fancy. And every figure she gathered by day she copied clean by night alone, by a single candle, her door bolted, for she had understood from the first that a half-built case is worse than none, a whisper. Kroll could laugh into the air. A reckoning. He could not. She kept the growing sheaf where no maid would think to look, and no agent would dare, behind a board she had loosened at the back of the still-room's highest shelf, folded together with the one other paper on earth that could hang her father's casebook. Each was nothing but the truth, set down in a fair hand, waiting for a soul willing to read it. Twice Kroll all but caught her at it. Once he came upon her at dusk in the passage, a candle cupped in her hand, and asked gently what business the still-room had so near his office after dark, and she said she was seeing the presses locked for the night, which was true, and he could not gainsay it. He did not like her being there, and she understood why. He had built his whole quiet theft upon there being no one in the house who looked, or listened, or wrote things down. And here was a woman the tenants brought their troubles to, standing in his passage with a candle. So she did her honest work, where he could see it, kept her ledger where he could not, and waited. And while she built it, without either of them once deciding to, she and the Duke came to know one another. It began with the Orangery, a long glass house on the south front that had been Lady Marrose's and had stood since she died, and more since the boy died, a place of frost and ruin. The orange trees black with cold, the panes gone green, the door swollen in its frame. It was the one corner of Fenwold the Duke still went to, which Elowen learned by going herself, drawn by the sheer waste of it, meaning only to see whether anything beneath the dead wood might be saved. She found him there in the last of the light, doing nothing at all, only sitting among the ruined trees with his hands loose between his knees. She made to withdraw. "Stay," he said. "You came to look at the trees. Look at them. You do not disturb me." So she looked at the trees, and found, under the frost-killed wood, 3 of the old stalks still green at the root. She said so, and after that, by no arrangement either would have owned to, she came most evenings with her knife and her brazier and her patience, and he was most evenings there, and the cold glass house became a country the 2 of them shared. She cut the dead wood away, the living wood answered, and something in the master of the house was doing the very same by slow degrees, though no one yet had the heart to say so. He was, she found, precisely what his mother had named him, not cold, but grieving, which wears, from any distance, the very same face. Beneath the shut look was a man of dry, quiet humor, and a great buried kindness gone all to waste, like a walled garden let go to nettles because no one can bear to walk in it. He spoke of his son once, only the once. It was late, and the brazier had burned down to a red eye, and he said, not looking at her, "He liked this place, Perrin. He used to eat the green oranges and be sick and swear on his honor he had not. He turned a dead leaf over in his fingers. I was here when he sickened. Not away. I have not even that to hide behind. He was 3 days ill before anyone thought to be afraid, and I let Kroll send to Raycote for Ovid, and did not send to London for a better man, because it was the marsh fever, they told me. And the marsh fever is nobody's fault. He said it the way a man says a thing he has said to himself 10,000 times in the dark. Nobody's fault. I have put my name to that comfortable sentence for 2 years. Eloan sat very still, with the whole truth of it burning behind a loosened board not 200 yards off, that it had been somebody's fault, that a fair copy of exactly whose fault lay within a stone's throw of where he grieved, and she could not give it to him. Not yet. Not as a wound, not before she had the proof that would turn it from cruelty into justice. So she gave him the one true thing she was able to give. A man cannot save what he has been taught to call the weather, she said. You did not fail to look, your grace. You were told there was nothing there to see. He raised his eyes to her across the embers, as though she had spoken in a tongue he had given up hope of hearing. You carry a great deal of this house, he said after a while. The still room, the sick, my mother's whole heart, the tenants send to you now, and not to Kroll. Why, you are hired to read to an old woman 4 hours in the day. It was the question she could not answer wholly without answering all of it. So she gave him a true piece of it. Because a house should not be let die of neglect while good people stand about it wringing their hands. I have watched one house go that way. Already I have no wish to watch a second. I cannot abide a thing left to rot that a little care would mend. It is my worst fault, sir. I would weed a battlefield. Something stirred at the corner of the Duke's mouth, the ghost of a thing, come a little further out into the light than she had seen it venture yet. I begin to believe, he said, that you would. It was the dowager who made the thing official, in the way the very old do, without troubling to ask anyone's leave. One afternoon in the last of the spring, she had Suki fetch a flat rosewood box from the cabinet in the south room, and when Eloan came in for her reading, it lay open on the little table, and on a bed of faded silk lay the household keys of Fenwold, a dozen and more, iron and brass, worn bright at the wards by 100 years of turning. The linen, the cellars, the stores, the still room, the muniment chest. These were Meros's, the old woman said, and her husband's mother's before her, and mine before that. They hung on a hook by the still-room door until my son's wife died, and then Mr. Kroll took them, for safekeeping, he said, and my son was too far sunk to see what a man intends when he gathers all the keys of a house into his one hand. Her clouded eyes found Eloan without a hair's error. I have got them back. Do not ask me how. I am 78, and I have my methods. They are yours now. Upon your person, at your waist, where the whole house can see them and know past doubt who it is that turns them, and on the day someone tries to take them off you, for someone will, you are to hold on. Your Grace, I am a companion. You are what I say you are in my son's house, and the county may choke on it. Take the keys, girl. Eloan took the keys. They were heavier than she had looked for. She wore them from that afternoon, and their small iron music went before her down every passage, until the sound of it was very nearly the sound of the house itself, remembering how to be a house. She was wearing them the next evening in the orangery when the Duke came in and stopped, and looked a long moment at his dead wife's keys hanging bright at the waist of the small brown woman cutting the life back into his dead wife's trees. Plot. My mother gave you those, he said. It was not a question. She did, sir. A silence. Good, he said at last, roughly. They hung on that hook too long. Mrs. Faulkner came with the warm weather, too. Isora Faulkner was the Duke's cousin at one remove, and she had married a Mr. Faulkner who gamed his way into an early grave and left her a jointure that shrank with every quarter day. She was 35, handsome, in a bright, hard fashion, and had been coming to Fenwold oftener and oftener since the boy died, and staying longer each time, on the sweet pretext of comforting a bereaved kinsman. Her design was simple enough: to make herself, if she could not be the Duke's Duchess, then the quiet power behind his shut door. She and Kroll had understood each other for 2 years. Her small debts about the county went quietly settled out of the estate's quiet river. His safety was bought with her silence, and with the smooth road she made him to the master. Each propped the other upright. Neither could have stood alone. Izora was cleverer than Kroll. She did not smile and threaten. She watched, and within a week of that spring's visit, she had seen the thing Kroll had been 2 comfortable years failing to see, that the little companion was not merely capable, but hidden. She said as much sweetly over the dowager's tea, turning the name upon her tongue like a sugared almond. "Read! From where?" One wonders. One does like to place a person. "There are Reeds in Norfolk. Are you by chance a Norfolk Reed, Miss Reed?" "Nowhere. Half so grand, ma'am. My father was a plain man of the South." "Was he indeed? And left you nothing, poor creature, so that you must go about carrying another woman's keys." The smile went nowhere near the eyes. How wearing it must be to have been bred a little above one's fortune, neither served nor serving, forever watched for the false step. She sipped her tea. "I do watch, Miss Reed. It is my one accomplishment. My cousin thinks me an idle woman, but I watch." "Then you keep a better book than I do, ma'am," Eloin said, "for I never did learn the trick of watching people. I only ever learned to watch the water." And the dowager, from the depths of her chair, made a small sound that in a less magnificent woman would have been a snort. But that night Isora Faulkner sat up late and wrote letters. She had among the wreck of her connections a cousin married to a northern attorney, and set him to asking, in the mild way of country lawyers, whether anyone thereabouts had heard of a young woman, a tradesman's orphan of some 24 years, with a turn for physic, gone from her people a season or 2 since. It was a small stone dropped in a wide pond. She thought it likely to come to nothing. She could not have known that the ripple of it would run 60 miles to the south, and there lap at the door of a magistrate who had waited 2 years for exactly such a ripple, a man who kept a dark fast chaise in his coach-house, and in his chest a great and patient wish to see a surgeon's daughter, and the book she carried, put quietly beyond all power of doing him harm. The answer to Mrs. Mauda Faulkner's letter came, as such answers do, in the very thick of everything else, folded in her cousin's careful hand, on a bright, oppressive morning late in that headlong spring. And it came up the drive that same morning by the same road as the man himself, for the pebble Isora had dropped so idly had rolled, in 6 weeks the whole 60 miles to Sir Roland Ash's study. And Sir Roland did not answer with a letter. He came. A dark chaise came up the Fenwald Drive at 10 in the forenoon, and out of it stepped the magistrate of Holbrook, red, righteous, terribly certain, run his quarry to earth at last by a servant's gossip and a lawyer's mild question, come north to reclaim the girl, and above all the book that stood between his conscience and a comfortable grave. Eloin was in the forecourt with a trug of cut lilac on her arm when the chaise stopped. She saw the door swing, saw the heavy familiar figure heave down onto the gravel, the high color, the small furious eyes that had presided over the ruin of everything she loved. The trug slipped from her hand, and the white flowers went everywhere across the stones. "There you are, Sir Roland." Ash said it with enormous satisfaction. "There you are at last, you sly, ungrateful, murdering girl." And that was the moment, of all the moments there might have been, that the Duke of Halveston came down his own front steps. He had heard the wheels. A strange carriage in his forecourt was still, faintly, his affair. Isora was crossing from the Rose Walk with her letter open, and a still, bright triumph in her face. Kroll appeared, soft-footed, in the shadow of the doorway. A red stranger bellowed at the dowager's companion, and the companion herself stood white and unmoving among a wreck of scattered flowers. What, said the Duke, in the voice that had once, across a gate, ordered nothing at all. "Is the meaning of this—" It all came out at once, and badly, the way such things do. Sir Rowland was delighted to find a duke to appeal to, and laid the whole of it before him in his own colors. That this young woman had helped her father, a disgraced surgeon, to the dosing of Sir Rowland's only son, who had died of it. That she had fled her people under a false name rather than answer for it. That his grace, all unknowing, had taken a poisoner's daughter under his roof and set her among his sick. And Isora stepped softly forward with her letter, and confirmed every word in her sweet, hard voice. "It is quite true, cousin. I made the inquiry only for the household's safety. You do see, she is exactly what this gentleman says she is. A surgeon's girl, disgraced, under a name not her own." The letter trembled, delicately, in her fingers. One does ask oneself why a woman hides so much of herself to come and scrub in a stranger's still-room. What else she might be hiding? Whose accounts, for instance, she has been so very busy copying these nights past. Every face in the forecourt turned to Eloan. She looked at the Duke, and the Duke of Halveston was looking at her exactly as he had at the gate, as at a thing he had not asked for and did not want, the shut face closing over once more. She watched him decide that she had lied to him, the one soul in 2 years who had looked at him unafraid. Now a woman with a borrowed name, a buried history, a poisoner's disgrace for a father, and Isora's letter trembling between them, a very great interest in his private accounts. And she found, standing among the fallen lilac with a magistrate's thick finger leveled at her and a duke going cold before her, that she was not afraid. It is a strange thing to fear a moment for 2 whole years, then step inside it and find the fear has nothing left to feed on. She had spent her whole life being no one to be safe. And here was safety ending, in a forecourt, before everyone. And the world went on turning under her feet all the same. There was only the truth left now, and the truth, at least, was a simple thing to say. "Every word this gentleman has told you of my name is true," she said. Her voice went out clear and level across the gravel, and the yard fell still to hear it. "I am Eloan Vaughan. My father was Gareth Vaughan, surgeon of Halbrook, and I took a false name and came north because this man broke him for a death he never caused, and because I was afraid. Sir Rowland's son died by his own recklessness, of a dose no physician on earth had ordered, taken atop a night's drinking, and his father could not bear the truth of it, and so he needed my father's good name to bury his own son's shame beneath." She turned from Ash to the Duke, and now she was aware of nothing in the wide world but the Duke. "I have the proof of it in my father's own casebook, sir. I have carried it 2 years and shown it to no living soul. For who was ever going to believe a broken man's daughter over a magistrate of the county?" She drew a breath and went on. "And yes, your cousin's letter is quite right. I have copied your accounts." A murmur ran round the forecourt like wind through standing corn. "I have copied them a month, in secret, by night, and they lie this moment behind a loosened board in your own still-room, fair and whole and complete. I did not bring them to you, and I am ashamed of it to my bones because I had a fortune of fear of my own to keep hidden. But I will bring them to you now, in front of every soul standing here. Because a child is burning in Lower Fen this morning who has no need to burn. And I have done, sir. I have quite done. With being decent about it, you are being robbed to the roots, by the man standing soft in your own doorway. He was paid £62 to carry the filth of the home farm clear of the Lower Fen spring. He spent 11 of them, and kept the rest, and left the sink running down into your tenants' drinking water, these 2 years together. That is your fever, your grace. It was never the marsh. It has a ledger and a date, and a man's name upon it, and it came up the hill once, sir. It came up the hill, and it took your son. For one whole heartbeat, nobody in the forecourt moved. Then Kroll laughed, soft, pleasant, disbelieving. It was the wrong thing, and he knew it the instant it was out of him. A man does not laugh at a thing like that, and every face that turned to him knew he did not. Isora's bright face had gone perfectly still. Sir Roland Ashe was saying something loud about hysteria and arrest and a desperate woman's wild tongue, and the Duke of Halveston was no longer looking at Eloan as at a thing he had not wanted. He was looking at her the way a man looks up when he has just been told, after 2 years in the dark, exactly how his child came to die. "Show me," he said, not to Ashe, not to Kroll, to her. All of it, now. They did it in the library, and it took the rest of that day and half the night. Eloan fetched the sheaf from behind the still-room board. A month of fair copies. The whole slow, patient case built a shilling of proof at a time, from doorways and tally sticks and the marks of honest folk, and laid it out on the long table under the Duke's own eye. Pell was sent to Raycote in the gig, and came back at dusk with the pipe-layer, ill at ease in his Sunday coat, who set his own dog-eared book down beside Eloan's fair copies, and swore to every line of it. £11, 1 day's labor, common clay land drain, and no stone culvert laid at all, because in all his life no man had ever paid him to lay one. Amon Thuy came on Jory Ludd's arm, and Mercy Kitto, and 2 more from Lower Fen, and set their marks again by candlelight before the Duke's own face. It was Mercy Kitto who undid the last of the Duke's composure, though she never meant to. She would not make her mark until she had said her piece, and she said it plainly, twisting her apron in her raw red hands, that she had lost her first child to the summer sickness and given her second up for loss the same road, that a small brown woman had sat the night through, with a hand about the girl's wrist and given her back alive, and that she had never once thought in her grief to wonder why the water she carried up from the lane-end well should have tasted those 2 bad summers, of something gone wrong. "We drank it," she said. "We give it our babies, and it were paid for. The mending of it were paid for." The Duke looked at her a long moment and made her no answer, because to that there was none a man could make. And 2 men had gone out that afternoon with spades to the rise above the old well at the Duke's word, and had found there precisely what Eloan's figures had promised them. No culvert, no dressed stone, only a cheap clay drain broken open at the joint, and the black wash of the home farm running down into the ground not 30 feet above the spring. Kroll made his defense, growing smaller and grayer as the candles burned down. The estate book was the only book, he said. The young woman had mistaken matters. She was never fitted to understand. A companion could hardly be looked to for a grasp of a great estate's affairs. Then the Duke opened the works bundle on the table beside Eloan's copies, his own weary signature at the foot of the bill, the pipe-layer's receipt pinned close beneath it, and set the 2 papers face to face, and understood the whole of it in about the length of time it takes a green bough to break. He was very quiet when he had done. He laid his flat hand upon the papers, upon the 2 years he had signed and never read, and when at last he spoke, it was not to Kroll at all. "It was in the water," he said to the table, to the stopped clock in the hall beyond, to a small boy who had eaten green oranges in a cold glass house the whole time. "It was in the water, and they told me it was the weather, and I put my own name to the bill that paid for the fouling of it." He looked up, and his face was terrible, and for the first time in 2 years, wide awake. "Get out of my house, Kroll, tonight. You will stand before the Raycote bench by noon tomorrow, and every figure this lady has taken will stand there with you, and every shilling you wrung out of my tenants you will render back, or you will answer for the want of it at the assizes, as the law answers men of your kind." Kroll went. There was, in the end, nothing else left him to do. At the library door he turned once, the last of the softness gone out of him entirely, and looked at Eloan with a hatred that had no smile anywhere left in it. "You could not keep to your still room," he said. "No," Eloan agreed. "I never could. Good night, Mr. Kroll. That left Sir Roland Ashe, who had come north to carry off a girl and a book. For the Duke of Halveston was himself a magistrate, and when the casebook was opened on the table, Gareth Vaughan's fair, clear hand, the doses set down to the grain, the hours, the plain truth of a reckless youth who had taken far more than his surgeon ordered, there was not an honest soul in that room who could read a page of it and go on calling the writer a poisoner. You knew, the Duke said to Ashe, very slowly. You buried an innocent man's name to save the face of your own, and you have hunted his daughter 2 years the length of the kingdom, to be sure the burial held. I shall keep this book. A fair copy of it goes to the bench at Halbrook, and another to your own Lord Lieutenant. And should you ever again send so much as a folded note up this road, it will be read aloud in the one place it can do you the most harm. Now, take yourself off my land. Sir Roland Ashe took himself off the Duke's land. He did not travel north again. And when the two of them were gone, the agent and the magistrate both, out into the dark by the same door, the library was very quiet, and that left only Isora Faulkner. She had sat the whole reckoning through in the corner, her cousin's letter crushed to a rag in her lap, watching the machine she had helped to build come apart plank by plank in the candlelight. Now she rose, still handsome, still upright, and made her last throw with a ruined gambler's courage. You will make a good deal of me now, I suppose, she said to the Duke. Your loyal cousin that let her little debts be paid out of your steward's quiet river. Oh, I knew where the money came from. Of course I knew. Do you imagine a woman as poor as I am does not know to the farthing where every shilling she is handed has been? You will turn me out. Turn me out where, cousin? I have 100 a year and a dead man's name and the rare privilege of being poor among people who were once my equals. You have never once, in the whole of your life, not known where you would sleep. She was shaking now, though she held her chin high. She hid a whole self away, to be free of one frightened man. I would have hidden a great deal more. Do not look at me as though I were the only monster in this room. I am not a monster. I am only afraid. I have been afraid 15 years, and it is wearying past your imagining, cousin. You cannot begin to think how wearying it is. The Duke's face had gone hard as the forecourt gravel. Alowan knew he was on the very point of being just and just. Tonight would be the finish of Isora Faulkner, turned out disgraced 100 a year, and the county's long, long memory. Your Grace, Alowan said, may I? He looked at her. He shut his mouth. He inclined his head. Alowan crossed the room and stood before the frightened, upright, hateful woman who had that same morning tried to see her taken up in irons. She did not gloat. She had learned, long ago and hard, that gloating is the one thing the cornered are braced against, and she had made a whole life out of never once giving people the thing they were braced for. You let your debts be settled out of the estate, she said quietly. That is theft, and you know that it is, and so does his Grace. But you did not foul the well. You did not spend the culvert money, and let the children of Lower Fen drink the difference down. That was Kroll's hand and never yours. You watched, and you profited, and you held your tongue, which is the very sin I lived by myself every day, until this morning, so I am poorly placed indeed to hang you for it. She held the bright, terrified eyes and did not let them go. There is a great deal of this estate that wants an honest, watchful woman to keep an eye to it. Now the watching man is gone. It is tiring work and it is decent work, and every hour of it is done in daylight, where no soul need ever be ashamed. You would owe it to no one, and to me least of all. I should like that most particularly understood. Or you may keep your 100 a year, and your widow's name, and go on being so very tired. It is yours to choose. Isora stared at her. Whatever she had braced herself to be dealt, it had not been this, and it undid her worse than any justice in the world could have. Her face broke once, hard, and set itself again. Why? The word came out of her without a shred of grace, the way blood comes. Because I've been exactly that tired, Eloin said, and because a house that has this one night thrown out a thief has no business marking it by making a beggar. Good night, Mrs. Faulkner. The Duke of Halberstam looked at his mother's companion across the wreck of his own long blindness, and something in his face that had stood shut since the boy died came quietly, and with great pain, open. The spring turned green, and then gold at the edges, and Fenwold, by slow, honest degrees, came back to life. The lower fen sink was carried off at last in good-dressed stone, by the Raycote man who was paid the true price of the doing, and not a shilling over. The old well ran clean within the month. The fever that year took no one, and the older tenants who had buried their small ones every summer for 3 years, and blamed the marsh, went about that June with a wary, disbelieving lightness, as though the sky itself had quietly changed its mind about them. What Kroll had squeezed out of them was reckoned up to the last farthing and given back, cottage by cottage, and what could not be found on the man himself, the Duke made good out of his own pocket, and counted it, he said, cheaply bought. The rents came in fair now, and went into a single honest book, kept in Eloin's own clear hand, the true rents and the true repairs, and no worn twin of it standing anywhere in the dark. And one evening, when the worst of it was mended, and the house had begun to fill with the small ordinary noises of a house that means to go on living, the Duke came to find her in the great stone hall, where she stood before the long case clock, with her keys quiet at her waist. "It has not gone in 2 years," he said from the foot of the stairs. He did not come nearer. "I gave orders. It never should. It seemed to me a kind of loyalty, I suppose, to leave the hour where he left it." He looked at the still gold face, at the hands folded at 17 minutes past 4. "I find I no longer know what it was loyal to." He liked the sound of it. He used to count the strokes at night from the nursery, and tell me in the morning if I had let it run down. Eloin said nothing at all. She had learned from his blind and formidable mother that there are silences worth a great deal more than the kindest thing a person can find to say into them. She only opened the case, and took down the key from its hook inside, and held it out to him across the quiet hall. He looked at it a long moment. Then he came and took it, and wound the clock himself, and the old movement caught and stirred, and began to tick, filling the cold stone hall with a small, steady sound it had not made since the morning a boy died. The Duke stood with his hand flat on the warm wood, listening, and did not trouble to hide his face, and Eloin was careful, this time, to be the one who looked away. The Dowager Duchess declared from the depths of her chair, and without consulting a living soul, that the house would be opened at last, that the shuttered rooms would be flung wide, and the county driven up the mended drive, and Fenwold would keep the spring the way it had kept it in her mother-in-law's day, before all the grief and all the dark. "You will see to the whole of it," she told Eloin. "The linen, the plate, the flowers, the candles my son will grumble at the cost of, and pay for gladly. You have run this house since April, girl, whatever anyone chose to call you. It is high time the county was made to see who runs it." So Eloin opened the great rooms, struck the covers and folded back the shutters, and had 2 years of dust carried out in pails, and filled the long gallery with the first roses, and 50 good beeswax candles that did not smoke. She wore plain dove gray, exactly the color a crowded room looks straight through, and wanted nothing else, for she had never in her life come anywhere to be looked at. She was looked at all the same. For the county came, every family for 20 miles, and among them the Faulkner ladies, one of whom had laughed at the gate that first cold evening, and told the Duke he ought to keep the nerveless little creature who had stopped a boy's bleeding in the mud. And near the top of the gallery, at the very height of the evening, the Duke of Halberstam crossed the whole length of the crowded room, every eye in the county upon him, which was, though Eloin did not understand it until afterward, precisely the point, and stopped before his mother's brown-haired companion in her borrowed plain gray, and bowed to her as a man bows to a woman he means the whole world to remark that he has chosen. "Miss Vaughn," he said, and said it so that a great many people heard him use the true name. "Will you dance?" She had not danced in 3 years. Her feet remembered it before her head could, and halfway down the set, under the candles, with the county whispering behind its fans, he spoke low beneath the music. "They said only months ago in my own gateway that no duke would ever choose you." He turned her under his arm, correct as the clock now ticking in the hall. "I said it. I have thought a very great deal this month past about what a fool a man can be who signs a thing before he has troubled to read it." "You will quite ruin me, your grace," she said, keeping her voice light, because if she did not keep it light, it would break in her throat. "A companion cannot stand up with a duke before the whole county and go on being a companion." "No," he agreed. "She cannot." He stopped, in the middle of the set, in front of everyone, which was not done, and set the whole gallery murmuring at once. "I will not offer you a marriage of convenience, Eloin. Your father's name is clean. The book has seen to that. You have no one left to run from and nothing left to hide, and no man's roof on earth that you are obliged to shelter beneath. You could walk out of this house tomorrow and be beholden to no living soul. You do not need me. That," he said, and his voice went right down to the bone of him, "is exactly why I am asking. Not because the house wants a mistress, it has had one since April. Because I should like for whatever is left of my life to be looked at by the one person who was never for a single moment afraid of me. Marry me as myself, choosing it, or do not, and stay and keep the house. I could not, and I will never trouble you with the question again. It is entirely yours to say. Everything, from here, is yours to say." The whole gallery had gone still, 50 candles, and the first roses, and 2 years of shut rooms thrown open to the spring night, and a clock ticking down the hall. Eloin looked up at him. She thought of the wet gate, and the boy's torn leg, and the dead man's lancet, and the long year she had meant to spend invisible and safe. Safe was such a small word. She had been safe the whole of her life. She had never once, until this ruined and mending spring, been seen. "Alaric," she said. She had never used his name. The gallery heard her use it, and he heard her use it, and something crossed his face that was worth more than the whole estate and the honeyed land it grew from. "That is a yes," she said. "In case the Duke requires it, read aloud to him." "I have grown very tired of holding my tongue. Yes, I will marry you as yourself, choosing it." She could not help the ghost of a smile. It was on her own mouth now. "On one condition, your grace. Name it, that the orangery is kept." "The 3 living trees. I have gone to a great deal of trouble over them, and I will not have them let go to frost again the moment I am made a duchess and grow grand." The Duke of Halveston laughed, aloud and helplessly, the length of the bright gallery, and it was a sound the county had not heard out of him in 2 years, and his blind mother, in her chair by the door, set down her glass and permitted herself, at 78, to look for one whole moment entirely and completely satisfied. They were married at Fenwold Church in the last week of that spring where the boy lay, and where a stone would in time stand over the dowager too, though not for some years yet, for Adolin had discovered a great new reason to be difficult about dying, and meant to see the nursery tower opened and used again first. Lowen wore, on her hand that day, the ring the Duchesses of Halveston had worn for 140 years. The old worn band the dowager took from her own knotted finger, and pressed into her son's palm the morning of the wedding, saying only that it had hung about doing nothing quite long enough, and it was past time it was set to work. She kept her father's lancet in the still room, in the drawer beside Lady Maros's receipt book in a duchess's own hand now. She kept the fair copies too, and the casebook, for a woman does not throw away the truth merely because it has finished saving her. Isora Faulkner came at last to keep the stillroom in the stores, and was, being clever, a great deal better at ordering a house than she had ever been at watching for other people's false steps. The two women reached, if never quite friendship, then the particular hard respect of people who both know exactly how tiring it is to be afraid. Jory Ludd danced at the wedding, badly, and was prouder of it than of anything in his life. And the clock in the great stone hall kept the hours, and struck them, and a boy who had counted its strokes from the nursery was not, in the ways that could be managed, forgotten. She had come to Fenwold to disappear. She had become, before the spring was out, the most thoroughly seen woman in the county, and she had found, to her own lasting astonishment, the one thing she had never in all her careful life thought to hope for. Being truly seen was not the ruin she had spent her whole life fleeing. It was the only shelter that had ever once been worth the name.